Hello AP students, let's wrap up Unit 4 today with Part 2. We're looking at 1800 to 1848, 10% of that exam. Now, overview, what are we looking at today? We have Thomas Jefferson all the way up to Polk. We're going to see some pretty exciting stuff in this time period, like the temperance movement. We have the abolitionist movement, the Second Great Awakening. It is very big social change during this time. Let's start off with Native Americans. Native Americans are definitely going to get screwed in this time period. That will not end anytime soon as we go through U.S. history. And that begins with Jackson and the Indian Removal Act. What he does is he says, I'm tired of all this conflict in the South with Native Americans. My solution to free up land for these Southern farmers is to ship all these Native American tribes, which are very diverse, by the way, all to this new Indian territory, okay? Now, he says that he's going to provide food, wagons, shoes, supplies for this trip, and of course, they provide none of that. In fact, it's a forced removal at gunpoint by American troops that force these natives to leave their homeland and go live in this new land that they don't really know how to live in, right? They've never been in this area. So it's called the Trail of Tears. We have thousands of natives dying on this path to this new Indian territory, and this is all happening under Jackson. We also have the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia. In this case, some Cherokee people sue Georgia, saying that their rights should be protected by Georgia and by the United States, and the Supreme Court refuses to hear the case, which shows that the U.S. government is not at all interested in seeing Native Americans as citizens yet, and they don't really want to get involved with them. At least they don't want to get involved with helping them, I should say. They're okay with stealing their land, but they don't want to help. Now, we also get Worcester versus Georgia, 1832. And the outcome of this case is what is important, okay? They say that the feds, not the states, have power over tribes, okay? So, again, it's kind of like the juxtaposition of the opposite side of the coin with the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia. This case, Supreme Court says, we're not going to protect your rights, but here, Worcester versus Georgia, they say, well, we have power over you, you listen to us, and not the state. So know those two cases. Next up are women. Now, it's very exciting to be a woman at this time in American history. We have plenty of social movements that they are involved in. One being the American Temperance Society, which is an anti-alcohol movement fronted by women. They have a famous slogan, "Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours." Now, women lead this thing because they're tired of their husbands coming home at night drunk, and they experience domestic violence, and they want to end that, right? They want to purify America and get rid of the evils that alcohol is causing. Next, women are also going to be asking for basic human rights. What a concept that is. They organized the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848 near the end of this unit. And it's organized by Elizabeth Stanton and Lucretia Mott, these two lovely ladies down here. They come up with the Declaration of Sentiments that says, hey, your Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal. Why don't women have basic rights as well? Why do we have to be second-class citizens in a country that is supposed to be free and fair? So that is women. Now, what's happening for African Americans during Unit 4? Obviously, slavery is continuing in America, but we do see the beginnings of a little bit of the government stepping in and trying to decrease slavery with the non-importations of slaves in 1808. And this outlaws slaves being brought over from Africa. Now, Southern slave plantation owners find a solution to this problem, and they have slaves make children who, of course, will be slaves in their adulthood. And so while this is a nice idea, a nice start, it really doesn't do much to help out slaves because slavery continues to go strong in the South. Now, we do see a couple of revolts. The Denmark Vesey slave revolt in 1822. This bad boy is inspired by the Haitian Revolution. Now, it's the largest planned revolt. They get over 9,000 blacks together to have this revolt. Unfortunately, the whites find out about this revolt, that it's going to happen, and it gets shut down. A bunch of black people are going to get arrested, many hanged. So it is an unsuccessful revolt, but you can see that if they get 9,000 blacks on board, obviously there's very strong anti-slavery sentiment in the South among blacks. Now we also have the Nat Turner slave revolt almost 10 years later, and this is the only effective revolt we see in America. It is effective. The Nat Turner and fellow slaves go out and kill a bunch of slave owners. They actually spare poor whites, which is kind of an interesting note there, but they do kill a bunch of rich white slave owners. And this is going to lead to much stricter anti-black laws in the South. And that's very important, obviously, because we're leading up to the Civil War, okay? We also see abolitionist movements in the North. We see the American Anti-Slave Society, which is made up of mostly men, actually, because they don't allow women, ironically. Frederick Douglass is one of these abolitionist movement members that you should definitely know. We also have kind of a weird idea from the American Colonization Society, run by Robert Finley, and he wants to send all the freed blacks over to a new colony called Liberia in Africa. Okay. There is actually, before the Civil War breaks out, there's going to be 15,000 freed blacks sent to Liberia, so this is a significant movement, but it's kind of racist at its core, and the idea is to get blacks out of America and get them their own country. Next we have immigrants and foreigners. This is going to be America's first big influx of foreigners from a European country that's not Britain, obviously, and it is because of the Irish potato famine. Now you'll remember that the potato originated in North America, and through the Columbian Exchange it ends up in Europe. The Irish find one particular strain of potato that grows really well in Ireland. They plant it all over their country. They have a ton of food. Everyone's happy until a disease hits this one specific potato strain. There's no diversity of potatoes to protect and have food as a backup. So the Irish people's main source of food dwindles and they start to starve. This is a series of statues in Dublin as a reminder of that event. Very traumatic. But millions of Irish people are going to come to America. Here's a timeline of Irish immigration. So this is the potato famine here. Millions are going to come to America, and they are treated very disrespectfully by the Americans, who are extremely racist towards the Irish upon first arrival. They will assimilate. Obviously they're white, so you can't tell once they lose their accents that they're Irish, so they'll assimilate and that racism will calm down. But the initial pushback against Irish people is very significant. What's happening with technology, culture, and reform? The biggest thing is the Second Great Awakening, which is a lot like the first one, but a little bigger. We see the emergence of camp meetings at this time, which is really a trademark of this Second Great Awakening. These guys are out here on the frontier, and they deliver these fiery speeches to people, and people fall down and have like strokes and get in touch with God, and they go home and they tell their village about this experience, and eventually these camp meetings turn into massive events, which is very, very exciting for frontiersmen. We also, this movement is going to inspire a bunch of reform movements, like that temperance movement, like that abolitionist movement, so we see Americans trying to become more moral. We also see some interesting ideas arise, like the Oneida community. These guys want to create heaven on earth. So what they do is they live in a communal setting where they share their money, they share food, they share their wives, they share everything in the Oneida community. So that could be an interesting example to bring up on the AP test. We also see the rise of Mormons or Latter-day Saints over in Utah. Well, they moved to Utah, but that's a big organization that grows out of this Second Great Awakening. Now, culturally, we also see the rise of Jacksonian democracy, where states are going to start dropping the requirement to own property in order to vote. So we call that universal male suffrage. So during this time, we see way more Americans being allowed to vote in elections, which is a good thing, right? It's no longer just rich land-owning men. Now, we also have the market revolution, or the first industrial revolution if you're a normal person, but AP calls it market revolution. We see technologies like the telegraph by Samuel Morse. Right back here again in our background, there's the telegraph. We get steam power, which is going to change how factory settings are going to, or how goods are produced in factories. We get steamboats and canals, importantly the Erie Canal, you should definitely know that one, but we get new transportation in that way. We get the cotton gin, which again is in the South, and it's going to extend slavery out west because it makes it more profitable. And we get interchangeable parts, which is produced for muskets actually at first, but it is basically every muzzle is the same, every trigger assembly is the same, and so that makes production much more efficient and cheaper. We also see the rise of the idea of manifest destiny, which this image in the back is what is being depicted. This idea is that God has given Americans North America, and it is our duty, our right, to go expand out west into these new lands and take it for ourselves as manifest destiny. Again, James Polk is really the manifest destiny president. He buys into this quite a bit. We also get the Free Soil Party arising in 1848, and the idea of this is no more slaves out west. Contradictory, we get the antebellum South, that idea of the Southern kind of perfect society, ironically, where the man leads the household and women are subservient and slaves listen to whatever they're told to do. Now, all this is leading to more sectionalism, meaning the North is feeling more and more like they can't connect to their Southern brothers or the West. So we get these three regional identities solidifying culturally during this unit. Now, what about the evolving federal government as far as its relationship with states and individuals? We get the nullification crisis under Jackson, okay? We talked about this a little bit the last video, but South Carolina is going to nullify the tariff of abominations, which are tariffs on goods that the South needs, finished goods like farming equipment, stuff like that, okay? Now, this is important because Jackson, who is the president, is telling this southern state, you need to pay your taxes. The state says no. And the state is supported by this guy right here, a face to match the personality, Calhoun, okay? This is Jackson's own vice president siding with South Carolina, telling Jackson to go frick off, okay? So that's kind of some conflict in the White House. Now, an answer, Jackson is going to lower the tariffs. He's going to not end them, but lower them significantly, and pass the Force Bill, which says the president, the federal government, can force the South using military. They can force the South to pay their taxes. They can force states to pay their taxes. And you can imagine how much this increases this sectionalism idea that we're talking about, right? That the federal government is the North, and they're kind of treating the South as, or the South sees it as they're being treated like second-class citizens who are forced to do things they don't want to do. Let's summarize this bad boy up with some turning points. We'll talk about some change in continuity and some cool stuff for you guys to look up. Now, turning points. We do have the Louisiana Purchase, which is a massive turning point. Our country's territory is going to expand, almost double during that Louisiana Purchase, so very important there. We have the War of 1812, America starting to feel like a real country, getting those nationalistic ideas, getting that confidence. We have the Monroe Doctrine, where you start to see America getting confident enough to step onto that world stage and say, no one touches the Western Hemisphere, this is ours, Europe, you keep your hands off. Now we get the Missouri Compromise, which is important because we start to see the process of America putting band-aids on the wound that is slavery. Now the band-aids aren't going to cure it, we're going to have a war, but it's important to know these compromises so we can see the road that leads up to that war. We have the Trail of Tears, which is a further worsening conditions for Native Americans, the death of many Native Americans at the hand of American troops, at the hand of Jackson's orders, so that's very significant as well. We have the Mexican-American War. Again, America is going to gain way more territory, and we're going to feel like we're the strongest Western Hemisphere power because America just beat up Mexico. Now, subperiods, historians call this era very often the era of Jefferson. The whole entire thing, they say, is the era of Jefferson because we're dealing with Democratic Republicans and Democrats. It's all about small government. It's very Jeffersonian, right? You could argue that there's the era of Jefferson under Jefferson's presidency and then the era of Jackson because he is a pretty influential figure as well, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. Now, changes in continuity. What's different? What's the same? Changes, territory. We gain way more territory through the processes we've talked about. Nationalism is going to increase. We're winning a lot of wars. Military is going to expand with the Barbary pirates, right? We have the Navy, we have the Army going out and fighting these land wars in North America. Social movements like the temperance and abolitionist movements, more democracy, no more land owning requirements, so we see an expansion of democracy. Now what's continuous? Native Americans are going to continue to be losing land at the hand of the Americans. So they're continuing to lose that land. Women are still not going to gain the rights they want. Now they're going to start petitioning for those rights and organizing, which is important, but they still will not gain them at this time. So, what would you name this period? How would you characterize it? Is Jackson more influential than Jefferson? Is the social movements more important than the territorial gains? That is up to you to decide. So how would you characterize this thing? Now, cool stuff. Westward expansion, we have The Reverend, one of my favorite movies. Again, super rated R, so ask your parents before you watch it, but a fantastic film. Slavery, we have Amistad. We also have 12 Years a Slave. 12 Years a Slave is another one of my favorite movies, so check that one out. It is fantastic. If you want to look at the West, we have the Alamo, which talks about that experience for those Texas Revolutionary troops and the attack by the Mexicans. So that wraps up Unit 4. I hope you guys are staying safe. Stay inside during the quarantine time unless you are exercising or doing something important. Okay? Have a good one, guys.